Jonathan Abrams. Please come here and take the stage.
I'm an entrepreneur, and I want to start with some portrayals of entrepreneurship in the media. So I want to start with Kevin Rose on the cover of Business Week and baby billionaires of Silicon Valley in Rolling Stone. These are pretty mainstream media portrayals of entrepreneurship. You may have seen them. And what's interesting is they've exaggerated the youth, the speed, the amount of money, and what they're really portraying is a get-rich-quick scheme. Now, Kevin Rose at this time did not make $60 million. He's not a kid. The guys in the Rolling Stone article are neither babies nor billionaires. So the realities of entrepreneurship are quite different. This is a book, The Illusions of Entrepreneurship, written by a college professor who's also a researcher for the Kauffman Foundation. The Kauffman Foundation did a research study on entrepreneurs and found the average entrepreneur is actually 40. In my industry, it's probably younger than that, but it's not all babies and kids. And of course, many people don't achieve success on their first company. So in this book, it talks about the realities of entrepreneurship. The average new venture will fail within 5 years. And even successful entrepreneurs often make less money as an entrepreneur or a founder than they would working for other companies. The statistics are actually worse than jumping to a cliff, and it's 50%. So Eric Ries is an entrepreneur who's very well known now for talking about the lean startup movement. And he recently wrote that one of the unfortunate side effects of all the recent publicity and hype around startups is that everybody thinks it's cool and that it's a guaranteed path to riches. And he points out that it's incredibly hard, stressful, and chaotic, and more often than not, it results in failure. Now, Mark Andreessen recently became a venture capitalist himself, but he's very well known as an entrepreneur. And before he became a VC, he had a blog that he's since taken down, but I still found it. And his very first post was called Why Not to Do a Startup. And Mark wrote, a startup puts you on an emotional roller coaster. You flip from day to day where you are euphorically convinced you're going to own the world to a day in which doom seems only weeks away and you feel completely ruined and back again and over and over and over. So Mark is right. Entrepreneurship is not a get-rich-quick scheme. I wish. It is, in fact, just like Mark said, it's a real emotional roller coaster with a lot of ups and downs. Oh, and I should say thank you to the folks at Prezi for these help with these fancy graphics. So there's many ups as an entrepreneur. You raise millions of dollars, and you start getting press and your pictures in the paper, and you can clip it out and send it to your mom, and maybe they start to understand what it is you even do and stop sending you brochures for dental school. And there's lots of downs. You have to lay off people. You have legal conflicts. You have bad press, cram downs. There's all sorts of ups and downs. So my story begins with a book by Jerry Kaplan. So his book is called Startup, a Silicon Valley Adventure. And I actually read this book before I was an entrepreneur, back when I was still living in Canada. And Amazon called his book a story about a company that was visionary yet doomed. So these days, everybody is obsessed with the iPad, right? Everybody's talking about the iPad. Well, there was a thing that came before the iPad. No, not the Palm Pilot. Nope, not that. Yes, Go. So Jerry Kaplan had an idea for something like a Palm Pilot or iPad way back in 1987. And I've had my friends say, you know, sometimes the stuff I start is a little too early. This is 1987. And it was a very visionary company. And unfortunately, the company was ultimately not successful. He had many high-profile investors involved. Ironically, some that were also involved in Friendster. And after the whole thing was done, he actually wrote a book. And he chronicled the story, the ups and downs. And I read this book. And crazily enough, I found it inspirational. And I said, you know, this sounds cool. Startups, VCs, entrepreneurs, wow. So I decided I was going to move to Silicon Valley. So I came down here. I got a job at Netscape. And then Netscape had its own ups and downs, and I got laid off. And since then, I've started a series of companies. And I was asked by the organizers to put up all the logos as, I guess, some sort of badge of honor. I don't know, it's supposed to be cool that I've started so many companies, or sort of this example of this, this horrible experience I've gone through that I need to be resilient for. The first company I started back in 1998 was called HotLinks. It was a social bookmarking company, yada, yada, yada. What's really, I think, important is the timing. So I was a first-time entrepreneur, in over my head, never been a CEO, never done any of this stuff. And then we started going through the dot-com boom, followed quickly by the dot-com crash, completely opposite but both crazy in their own way. And at the same time, while I was going through all this, I also, unfortunately, ended up going through multiple personal and family crises in my life and in my family's life, while I was also being this first-time entrepreneur, being a CEO, going through the dot-com crash. So this was probably the toughest and worst period of my life. And at the end of it all, HotLinks merged with another company. I took another job. That company merged with another company. I got laid off again. And I was left thinking, wow, did my career peak at 29? Because things were really dead. The VCs weren't funding. People were not starting companies. People were totally had lost their internet, the enthusiasm for the internet. And nobody was really excited about consumer internet technology during this 2002 period. Things were really, really dead. And I had no idea that, running my own company at 29, that may have been the peak of my career. And it was sort of a depressing thought to think, okay, now for the next, whatever, 50 years I'm alive, it's going to be all downhill from here. And of course, I had no idea what was to come, but that is sort of what went through my mind. So, left to my own devices, I started thinking of a bunch of different stuff. I started making observations about the internet, because even though internet companies were no longer hot, we were still using the internet. And I noticed that the way we used the internet was so different from the way I interacted with people in real life. It was so anonymous and random and creepy and isolated. And I also, of course, was inspired by the previous generation of online community sites, as well as things outside of the internet, like Stanley Milgram's Small World Theory, which you guys probably know is the 6 degrees of separation. So a whole bunch of goofy ideas came together in my head. And I said, what if you could build some sort of real-life experiment where I could prove, not necessarily even 6 degrees, but I was really more interested in 2 degrees, 3 degrees, integrate the real life and offline social context that you have with your online experiences. And get people to create profiles, even if they weren't dating, even if they weren't entrepreneurs looking to meet VCs, and make the internet sort of more like an online cocktail party, not with an anonymity, with real identity, where I would actually be Jonathan, not CyberDude307, this concept of the social graph. And everybody's always looking for sort of that Pez dispenser moment, a really sort of simple way of describing it. But really, it was just a bunch of goofy ideas that came together during a time, obviously, when things were pretty slow. And out of it came this experimental prototype called Friendster. So back in these early days, I had no office, running out of my apartment. The data center, well, I had a friend whose startup had gone under, of course, and he let me put Friendster on one of his servers he still had somewhere for free. So we had no employees, no funding, no nothing, and then eventually a very small amount of money. And these days we call that the lean startup, but back then it was just really reality. That's what I had to deal with in 2002. So half my friends thought that this idea sounded really, really cool. But the other half had a slightly different reaction. My business acquaintances, my friends would ask, so what's this new thing you're working on? And I would start to tell them a little better. And I said, I've got a website. And you're actually going to say on this website who you're friends with. And you're going to send them an invitation and ask them to be friends with you. And then they're going to get this request, and they're going to have to accept it, yes or no. And then it's going to show on this website, these are your friends with little pictures, and you can see your friends' friends and all this kind of stuff. And half of them said, huh? That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. But it was 2002. Things were pretty dead. And I persisted with this idea. And this is what happened in 2003 when we launched. We quickly went from 0 to millions of users. And I got a surge of Oxycontin. So, oxytocin. That too. I knew I'd taken the wrong thing. So this is the ups, right? This is the ups of the roller coaster when things are going really, really well. And now, of course, everybody's familiar with these social networking type websites, and probably everybody gets friend requests from a whole dozen of sites that drive you crazy. These are some quotes from back then. Has anybody seen these quotes? But MySpace, where hipsters from Hollywood meet, Facebook more addictive than crack. Twitter has generated more buzz than an F-14 Tomcat fighter jet. I think Michael has seen these quotes. But actually, I'm lying. These were actually quotes about Friendster back in 2003. So this was the up period. And it's hard to remember now, as Friendster had all these problems, and even Michael confuses Friendster and Facebook, that back then, Friendster was a hot company and was doing well, and that was the up period of the roller coaster. So then it was followed by some more turbulent times. So in 2004, I got replaced as CEO. The company ended up having 4 CEOs in 2 years, ended up having various problems throughout 2004, 2005, et cetera. So now it's obviously, these are sort of the down parts of the roller coaster. And the San Jose Mercury News wrote about me being replaced and said, it's part of life. The venture capitalist guillotine, every entrepreneur's nightmare. Very dramatic, but the important thing, I think, to remember is it's not just you. So this happened to me. It was a frustrating experience, but I was not the first founder to be replaced. I wasn't the last. I wasn't the first entrepreneur to get screwed by VCs in Silicon Valley. I wasn't the last. Noam Wasserman is a professor at Harvard Business School, and he studies founder-CEO succession, founder-VC relations, all this kind of stuff. And he says 4 out of 5 entrepreneurs are forced to step down from CEO's post, and most are shocked when it happens, and then they often leave the companies, and yada, yada, yada. 4 out of 5. So again, a lot worse than a 50% jump to a cliff. And these are real statistics of things that are happening that are really industry-wide, that are bigger than just me. So what I've learned from this experience was it's really annoying when you go through something tough and people say, oh, it makes you stronger. It's annoying at the time, but it's true. When I went through all those experiences when I was running my first company during the dot-com crash, all of that gave me a certain resilience, I guess, because I don't know how I would have gone through the frustrations of Friendster and coped with it if I hadn't gone through what was really, in some ways, a worse period. And I've also learned that I have to take a certain level of detachment because I have no idea sometimes what's going to happen next. When I was thinking my career had peaked at 29, I had no idea that Friendster was to come. And when I was working on Friendster, I had no idea what the success was going to be. And the next company I started, I thought was going to grow as fast as Friendster, and did not. So what I've learned is that an entrepreneur, what really defines an entrepreneur is often taking control and making things happen, being proactive. But even when you're doing that, you still can't control everything. And you have to sort of accept a little bit of the uncertainty. So 2006, I started another company. And amongst the frustrations, I wanted to compete with eBite and provide a much-needed alternative. But I also wanted to replace the frustrations I had with Friendster by working on something fresh, starting with a clean slate, and hopefully learning from some of the mistakes from Friendster. And I have been asked, as part of this event, the questions by the organizers, what makes an entrepreneur and what makes me keep going? They told me stories of other entrepreneurs who had a failure problem and then sort of gave up or were burnt out. And how do you cultivate, or how do I cultivate my resilience? And I thought about it and realized, I don't know. The whole question is one I don't usually even think to ask. I just do what I do. And it made me think, am I like Charlie Brown keeping going for the football only to get it pulled away? Because this is just what I do. And Jerry Kaplan, who wrote that book, Startup, after writing the book, he didn't quit. He's started at least 2 companies since then. And it was a little hard for me to sort of take a step back from just being somebody who starts stuff and thinking, why am I this way? So Winston Churchill said that success is the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. I actually don't think, that doesn't really resonate with me. I don't think I'm that sort of noble. So I drew inspiration from another inspirational figure that felt a little bit more familiar to me, Michael Scott. So on the TV show The Office, one of my favorite episodes, Michael Scott, the goofy boss, starts his own paper company. And he's going broke, but Dunder Mifflin doesn't know that, and they're trying to acquire his company, and they're negotiating. And he says, I don't care about the money. If this company fails, I'm just going to start another paper company. And then another one. And if that one fails, I'll start another paper company. And he's got this crazy, goofy stubbornness. And that sounded familiar to me. So I often meet people who say, I had an idea for something like Friendster, or I had an idea for something like, whatever. And lots of people have ideas, but very few people translate them from idea and actually taking that leap across what I'm calling the fear chasm. Most people aren't that crazy. Most people don't actually go and do it. And I think that is the biggest step, to go from an idea to actually making something out of nothing. And what you really have to do is you just do it. But most people are not, because of fear. And even if you do get past that stage, which most people wouldn't, there's so many potential bumps in the road. You could get fired, you could get washed out, you could have a recap. I mean, these things, again, I don't have time to go into all the statistics of these things, but they happen very, very commonly, more commonly than the guy who makes 60 million in a minute on a magazine. And that's why many entrepreneurs end up going through the process more than once. So one of the things that I think is really important is to have some perspective into what you consider a success versus a failure. One of the organizers of this event told me, Friendster was a big success in many ways, and many entrepreneurs would love to have that success, and many won't. And I look at it both ways, because Friendster was a very innovative company, and the reality is it's still in business. Friendster didn't go out of business, and yet it's held up because of the potential and because of companies like Facebook. Some of the magazines call it an iconic failure. And even though I haven't been CEO for a long time, I was the first CEO of 7. Very few people probably remember any of the other 6 CEOs. So I'm still, for better or worse, associated with something I haven't been in charge of, for a long, long time. The other thing is, whose narrative are you following? Since moving on from Friendster, I've done a ton of stuff that's important to me. I've started new companies. I've started a family. I've opened a nightclub in San Francisco that hopefully some of you have been to. But the narrative that some of the blogs or media would have is still me as this bitter loser about a company that they still want to make jokes of, that I haven't worked at for many, many years, that I started 8 years ago. So as an entrepreneur, it's really vital for me to take control of my own narrative, because if I let other people dictate that, I really wouldn't be able to keep moving forward and still moving on to the next bigger and better thing. Another thing that I think is relevant to answering this question is what your mindset is. So there's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck that I found very, very interesting. And she says that most people have either a growth or a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset people believe that their abilities, their talents, their intelligence are fixed. And you're either maybe smart or you're not, and that's that. And growth mindset people feel that they can continually improve, expand their abilities by effort, by trying, by taking risks, taking challenges. And which mindset you have has a very, very big impact, I think, on how you'd approach failure, how you would approach being an entrepreneur. Because fixed mindset people are really looking only for opportunities to prove what they already know again and again and again with no risk. People with the growth mindset are actually looking at potential challenges, opportunities, and risks as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to get better. So it's a completely different approach. And without that growth mindset, I don't think I would have been doing anything I've been doing for the last 10 years, because most of it is stuff I wasn't really qualified for. So finally, I began by talking about Jerry Kaplan's book. So his book was not a book about some kid who made 60 million in a second. It was a cautionary tale about a company that really did not succeed, and yet I found it inspirational. So some of you out there, looking at, I've shared a bit of my ups and downs of the entrepreneur roller coaster, a bit of my cautionary tale, and some of you may, instead of being scared by it, may be crazy enough to find it inspirational. If you do, and if you start a company of your own, please send me an email, because I'd like to hear about it. Thank you.